Hey, nice Atypical Daydream t-shirt.
Thanks. It's my favorite podcast.
Mine too. But where can I get a t-shirt?
It's easy. The link is in the show notes.
That is easy. I'm gonna go get one right now.
That's a great idea.
Thanks. Bye.
You bet. Stay cool.
It doesn't make sense that safety would be my primary concern or deter me from traveling. It's going to happen somewhere. You got to die for some reason.
Hello, my atypical daydreamers. Welcome to the show. This is a podcast about life on the road, and thanks for stopping by. The comedian Pete Holmes has a joke that I love about life not making sense, but there's this one part where he says, "You think you're in America? Zoom out. You're on a space rock floating in nothingness." I love this perspective. Sometimes I try to imagine the endless rivers, roads, fields, valleys, and peaks on Earth. Almost all of it I will never see. My guest today is a creative force, part entrepreneur, part artist, part educator. But above all, she's a relentless explorer. Flannery Foster isn't on a permanent vacation. She's on a mission to hit all 330 countries, colonies, territories, and exclaves on this space rock we call home. And if you're wondering how or why someone does this, stay tuned.
I was a performer. I worked in music PR. I owned 10 brick and mortar locations of a yoga studio called Good Yoga in Brooklyn. I also owned a guest house, a little cafe, etc., a guest retreat upstate in New York. And I am a travel agent, an accredited travel agent with IATON, and that's recent. And it's a result of my decision to travel to all 330 countries, colonies, territories, and exclaves. I came to that decision 2.5 years ago. At that time, I had been to 135 countries, colonies, territories, and exclaves. Someone had asked me, how many are there? And I didn't know. I knew that there were 195 UN countries, 5 observer states, and I knew that there were lots of influencers and people throughout history who had visited those. But I knew that I had been to a lot of destinations that were not UN countries. And I was interested in those places and why they weren't countries and what a colony is, based on my own experience of a colony or what's the difference between a colony and a territory and an exclave and an enclave. And in my research, I came across a website called the Traveler's Century Club. And it is a club for, from what I can glean, mostly wealthy white people, mostly wealthy white men, who have completed at least 100 of these destinations on the list that they had compiled of 330. Now, most of the people who had completed this list had completed it when it was only 328, because, of course, politics are dynamic and borders are as well. So I was interested in these people. And maybe there are more people who have done this, but it took me so long to find this list. I mean, if they had done it, it was probably by accident, not knowing, that this list existed. So in looking at this list, I noticed it was less than 30 humans had done this. And only 3 of them were women. 2 of them had done it with their husbands. A third had been financed by her husband, but he stayed at home. Very interesting agreement. She is still alive, and I believe her name is Audrey Waldman. I might have her surname wrong. She's still alive. The other 2 women and their husbands, all 3 of these women had achieved this feat when they were in their 80s. As I'm speaking to you now, I'm 47. When I decided to count up my countries and take on this mission, I was 45. So at the rate that I'm going now, I'm targeting a minimum 14 new destinations for the next 12 years so that I can complete the list by the time I'm 60. Yes, I would be the fourth woman. Yes, I would at that point, perhaps, unless somebody sneaks up behind me, which is entirely likely. And I hope they do. I hope that there are more young women traveling. If I get it done by 60, yes, I might be the youngest to do it. But I will be probably the first single and self-financed woman to do it, which to me is more interesting than youngest. So why? Why do this? One day it occurred to me, if I had all the money in the world, if you do what the rich people do, you make your money, earn money. I've already started a foundation. I've already, put my money in all the funds and yada, yada. And my money's earning money. I don't have to think about spending it or earning it or any of that. The money's there. I've done all the big projects that you do with the money. And what is it that what does my daily life look like? And I started reverse engineering my life to get paid to do what I would pay to do. So I isolated it down to health, because without that, there's nothing. Expression, art. I've always been an artist, and now I understand that I'm also firmly on the spectrum. So autistic, artistic, and travel. Health is my discipline, expression is my passion, and travel is my obsession. It's the only time that I feel completely present, where everything is new and I have to be completely in this moment. There's no past, there's no future. It's how do I get from point A to point B? What's this new language? What's this new smell? That eventually led to me becoming a photographer. There's a guy named Christopher Isherwood. He wrote a book called The Berlin Stories, which became a play called I Am a Camera, which became Cabaret. He was in the subject matter of Cabaret. He was translating Sanskrit texts for a guru who was based in Berlin. And he, the first chapter of that book, he's likening the mind to a camera, which is actually a pretty common explanation for the yogic Buddhist way of thought. That ideally, without the ego, without the I, we're just here perceiving and with no judgment. And I find that I'm able to achieve that state more often when I'm on the road. I guess the passion for travel started early, when my consciousness was developing. My father was in the military. I was born in Colorado, but before that, I was a year old. We were living in Germany. My mother and my older sister and I would travel. She made sure of that. So from the time until I was 5 years old, I had traveled the Schengen states of Europe when we lived in West Germany. So by the time I was in kindergarten and in Vermont, after my parents divorced, I had an awareness of the world that, the other kids in Barrie, Vermont did not. And I was always eager to keep exploring. I think the awareness that my grandmother had been an immigrant from Spain, Spain fascinated me, and just the awareness of America at that time being a place where everybody was from somewhere else and we were all proud of it. So when I was in the 8th grade, we had French exchange students visit our school, a sister school situation with a school in Sèvres, a suburb outside of Paris. And we got to visit them. I babysat and saved up money. And I was also singing telegrams. So I did that for cash so that I could pay my way to a summer in Europe. That's my love of travel started in Europe. But, my first, once I moved to New York when I was 20, and you become aware of, all the different cultures around you. That's why New York is the world's city. And, my first real adventure location at the time was 1998 in Israel. My boyfriend at the time was Israeli. Everything I learned about Israel came from him, and he was certainly not a Zionist, though his grandfather had been one of the original occupiers of Palestine. But he was vehemently anti-war and anti-Zionism. When I was there, Syria was bombing across the border. This is where I learned that there is no more popular human on earth than Bob Marley. and that he transcends religion, he transcends politics. Most people can't understand what he's saying. You know, the rhythm is undeniable. So, we had Bob Marley playing in our car as we stopped to talk to some IDF soldiers for directions. And, once I realized that Egypt was just right there on the other side of the fence, and I saw the Israeli watchtower, and I had to take a picture of it because it was painted like the Egyptian flag. And then we saw the cars coming towards us, and the Israelis got a little nervous, like, oh, yeah, you're not allowed to take pictures of that. So I thought I'd gotten us all in trouble. But then, the Egyptians just wanted to come hang out. So here were two countries that diplomatically were at odds, but all they wanted to talk about was Bob Marley. And ever since, in the 165 places I've been, I promise you that in every political entity on earth, there is a bar prominently displaying an image of Bob Marley and playing the Legend album. I always wanted to get to the other side of that fence. When I finally did in 2006, I ended up getting kidnapped. I can't tell that story because I've typed it out. So, it's on my website. But there's plenty of danger on the road, especially as a solo female traveling. That experience in Egypt, oddly, rather than deterring me from wanting to travel, it reinforced that, okay, it doesn't make sense that safety would be my primary concern or deter me from traveling. It's going to happen somewhere. You got to die for some reason.
Hey, it's Josh. Hope you're enjoying the podcast. And if so, are you wanting more road stories? Well, good news. I've got you covered. Consider becoming a patron. You'll have access to loads of great bonus stories that there just wasn't time for. And you'll be supporting a truly independent podcast. Find the link in the show notes. And thanks. Now back to the show.
How do you travel so much? And people, I think, make assumptions about me, based on, I was born white in Vermont, which, is an accident of birth that has certainly brought me an incredible amount of entitlement and privilege, which I'm well aware of. But I was not raised with money per se. My mother worked for the Department of Education. My stepfather was a Veterans Administration nurse. He had been in the military. My entire family had been military since, they immigrated here in 1918. I'm not rich, but, and I wouldn't say I'm always smart, but I'm definitely resourceful. So what I discovered was from living in New York, and by owning the guest house and making my business, pay for the things that I want to do, making my business the thing that I'm passionate about, which I wouldn't always recommend. There's some concerns there, but I found that it was cheaper for me to travel than it was for me to live in New York City. So by earning New York City money, but being able to rent out my room because I lived in a guest house, or when Airbnb had less restrictions, I was using my rent money to travel when I wasn't home. It just was a no-brainer. When I got to New York, I'm like, why am I paying this much for Thai food? I could be in Thailand. So yeah, that I don't spend money on the things that I see other people, the people who are asking me how I afford this. I don't spend money on, designer clothes. I don't spend money on Broadway. I don't spend money on, fancy restaurants in New York. It's more interesting for me to be spending my money and much less money traveling the world. So I begin with the end in mind. So I have what I would describe as a super objective. And, the super objective is not related to the particular outcomes, like going to all 330 countries, owning a yoga studio, all that. My super objective ultimately is, trite as it sounds, is love, right? Is self-actualization, is to, be in the present moment, do as little harm, and to help as many people as possible. And this is where the yoga, the Buddhism, the philosophy, I don't believe in God. I believe heaven and hell exist in our own minds and on this planet. I've seen hell. and go to Varanasi, see a woman with, 3 babies strapped to her with her bare hands making cow dung patties to sell for fuel. Like that, for most people, that would be hell. If you told them that was going to be their life, you're going to be plopped from your life, in New York or Berlin, and now that's your life. That's hell. And this woman was living it with a smile on her face. The super objective and finding a way to fulfill that didn't make me insane. How to live in conscience and have a right livelihood. So yes, once I established that health, expression, and travel were my 3 most important things, my ikigai, my Venn diagram, finding out where those overlapped, and then looking around at the opportunities that were here. Because it didn't take money. I had 0 money when I started Good Yoga. When I net leased the 3,600 square foot warehouse in Greenpoint with 9 bedrooms and a space to do yoga, I had no cash, no investment. But I had an idea, and I figured out how to make that idea benefit the landlord. I did pop-up retail to expand the business as well. Several of my locations did not require a deposit. Once I had established a business and, I had my integrity on my resume, where I knew that I had landlords who would vouch for me with other landlords, et cetera, then you're unstoppable. So once you determine what your super objective is, what your particular skills are to serve that super objective. And then the plan doesn't have to be something concrete. It's what are the opportunities that will allow me to get closer. And when I see obstacles, I turn them into opportunities. I have 165 countries, colonies, territories, and exclaves to go. I made it to my halfway point. About 111 of those are UN countries, UN states. The remainder are colonies, territories, exclaves. It's only going to get harder at this point. I've done most of the contiguous places that I can. I haven't visited Venezuela, but I've visited everywhere else in South America. Aside, mostly it's islands. The world is composed of very many islands and places that are just harder to get to. Northern Pacific, the islands of Oceania. Antarctica is 7 spots on this list of 330. So it is going to get more challenging, but that's part of the fun. Certainly as a woman, it's much more challenging to get to places like Afghanistan, Iran, Tajikistan. There's a place that I went to or tried to go to in the northeast states of India where women can't travel without a next of kin, your brother, your father, or your husband. And if you don't have one of those, too bad. So I certainly understand that I appear as a, white savior Barbie. And, in many ways, nothing really special about some white woman traveling the world. But when I'm actually meeting people, or particularly going to places where women don't have as much freedoms, and talking to, women and men and girls, and when they find out that I'm traveling by myself, when they find out that I've been to these places, they get excited. They tell me it inspires them. And, maybe not to go to 165 countries. I frankly wouldn't recommend it, but now I've started. It's a little bizarre, but it is an obsession. It's not something I totally have control over. If not to, travel the world, at least to understand that there's other options than, being married at someone your father chose and having children and, living a life that makes your parents happy. And then when they're gone, you're left with it. You have to be careful as a woman, and you have to be careful just as a traveler. I treat every gun like it's loaded. Trust is not easily won. I don't put myself in situations where I'm, thank God for Uber, so that there's at least a record of, what car I'm in, or, my mother and my partner get a text when I get into an Uber. But yeah, I was essentially kidnapped in Delhi as well. He was very eager to bring me to get some black tar heroin or some brown sugar heroin. He was telling me all the different varieties of heroin he wanted to do with me. And, luckily we got into a car accident and I was able to jump out. And he was demanding the fare as I was leaving. I don't know what I intend to learn at the end of this. When I think of people who've already done it, so far at 165, nothing big happened. When I hit 100, which was Lebanon and Jordan, were my 100 and 101st. Did I feel different? It's an arbitrary number. It's a lot. It signifies a lot. Just like, any kind of growth, you don't see it every day. But then looking back at the end of it, I do realize the ways that I've changed, especially coming back to the United States and coming back to the United States now. The learning that one does simply by meeting other people, being in their experience. When I do travel, I try to travel as cheaply as possible, $10 to $20 a day, particularly when I'm in countries where the average citizen is living, I try to live as low as I possibly comfortably can, especially if that seems to be how the community is living. I try not to be at international resorts. And, luckily, it saves me a lot of money. Yeah, understanding that hot water is, coming out of one's faucet on demand. Clean water coming out of one's faucet on demand is an absurd luxury. The majority of humans on Earth don't have that. And it's not that I think, oh, well, then we shouldn't have that. I think everyone should have that. And it's entirely attainable and possible. So when I hear people complaining about nonsense or saying that, I can't live without my latte, I'm like, you can live without it. Yeah, I think in general, sure, it's probably made me a better person. I don't think I hold myself to a pretty high standard, and I'd like to, keep getting more and more selfless and just being a vehicle for, a witness, going to places, taking photos, telling other people's stories, and trying to serve them as much as possible.
I want to thank Flannery for sharing her experience. Make sure you visit her website, flanneryfoster.com, and all of her other sites covering travel education, wellness, music, photography, and of course, all of her adventures around the world. And she's got a podcast coming soon called Bad Yoga Podcast: Sex, Drugs, and the Unbearable Business of Yoga. Links in the show notes. This podcast is created and produced by me, Josh Caldwell. Music by Visual Aid, my side music project. General support and copywriting by Miranda Caldwell. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come back next time.